get started a little bit late. There was obviously a room mix-up, which you know because you're here now. So, yeah, nonetheless, we're getting started right now. My name is Angela Yu, and I would like to welcome you to the Veritas Forum at the University of Delaware. Yeah. Right. Great, thanks so much for being here today. So tonight's forum is entitled, Is There Truth Beyond Science? Veritas is Latin for truth, so we're here tonight for real discussion, connecting truth to our hardest questions and deepest beliefs. We have asked our presenters to share personally, ask honest questions of each other, and model a conversation that all of us can continue this evening and beyond. Our hope is that everyone in this room would be challenged. The Veritas planning team aims to create events that are relevant, thought-provoking, and engaging to people of all backgrounds and beliefs, and we need your help with that. Please pick up your Veritas 60-second survey form. Did all of you get one at the door? Okay, great. And take 10 seconds right now to fill out just the top half of the front side. So I'm going to create the space right now for you to fill out this card, and if I had one, I would fill it out too. Great, so once the form is over, please fill out the remaining sections of your survey card, both on the front side and the back side. Please give your completed survey card to one of our ushers as you exit the auditorium. Now I'd like to introduce this evening's moderator and speakers. Our presenters this evening are Dr. Joshua Swamidass and Dr. Ismat Shah. Dr. S. Joshua Swamidass is a physician, scientist, and assistant professor of laboratory and genomic medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. He received his BS in biological sciences, MS in information and computer sciences, and PhD in information and computer sciences with a specialization in informatics and biology and medicine from the University of California at Irvine. What a mouthful. During his time at UC Irvine, he also earned an MD, medical doctorate, and graduated with distinction in research. Dr. Swamidass leads a computational biology group at Washington University in St. Louis that studies information at the intersection of biology, chemistry, and medicine. He's also a speaker for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, BioLogos Voices, and the Veritas Forum. He recently served as a science advisor for AAAS Science for Seminaries and blogs at Peaceful Science at peacefulscience.org. Our second speaker is Dr. Ismat Shah, who's a professor in both the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Department of Material Science and Engineering. He has been teaching at UD since 1999 and teaches energy technology and society and equilibrium and material systems. He is the director of the Energy and Environmental Policy Program and has undertaken research projects in water treatment, magnetic nanoparticles, and solar cells, to name a few. Prior to that, he received his PhD in materials physics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and at UD, he has received the University of Delaware Excellence in Teaching Award. And last but not least, John Groth will be facilitating our discussion tonight as the event moderator. Lieutenant Colonel John W. Groth is an adjunct professor at UD in the Behavioral Health and Nutrition Department. He teaches undergraduate courses in death and dying, health and religion, personal relationships, and life management. He received his bachelor's degree from Ursinus College and 2 master's degrees from Princeton Theological Seminary. He is a retired United States Air Force chaplain and recently became the area director for an organization called Priority One Foundation, a ministry for the development of children. He's also married to his smoking hot wife, Renelle, for 37 years, and his 3 children, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, are all UD brats. Now, please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Dr. Swamidass, to the stage.
For having me here. Should I use the mic, or is that right? Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I have a small 2-year-old child at home. It's very hard to travel, but I have to tell you, every time I get invited by students, it really feels worth it. And I've had a little time to interact with a few of you here. There's something special here, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know you two better. So thank you for having me here. We're here today to talk about, is there truth beyond science? And if you look up there, I have a lot of education, but I still managed to get a typo. That's my first slide. And now you can wonder if the entire talk that was intentional, so I could tell that joke. Or if you really found when I'm idiots. But if you read my blog, you'll find out I have typos everywhere. So it turns out you can actually get to where I am and still be a mess. As my wife will tell you. So please don't be intimidated by me. I'm just someone just like you. I'm a little bit farther along. I just found myself in science. I love science. I found myself here. I was made for this. I mean that both like in the same way how maybe everyone says that, but I also really believe that there is something truly. It's hard to explain. It's almost like the Mona Lisa, or like a great piece of art, or a great song. I feel like I was made by God for this. What does my work do? I work with a group of students. I normally put a picture of them, but I do work really at the intersection, as you said, between biology, medicine, and computer science. I get to work with graduate students, a small team of graduate students, and a staff scientist. And we're this little band of explorers going out to try and find real solutions to problems that are out there that can affect human health. So one of the big things that we spend time on is understanding how to make drugs more safe for people. And in particular, we're really interested in how to make drugs more safe for children. So that's what the two big efforts of our group are right now. But we also do stuff in cancer genetics, and also in image analysis, and also in healthcare mining. The key thing that we're doing is like this very small team of like 5 or 6 people is like, are there ways we can come to really make sense of information to really help people? So science is what I did. I had a choice between going down a medical path, which would have been secure, which would have paid much more than I get paid right now. I had the choice of going into industry and getting even paid more than that. In the end, I wanted to go into the university, and though I do get offers to go do other things at times, there's this part of me that knows I'm in exactly the right spot. And it's because I'm connected to this great tradition of science. The science that is never, I mean, it's sometimes copied in industry, and I'm not saying that there isn't good things that happen in industry, but it's always been something that has been something separate from that. I really put the marker point of when science starts about 400 years ago, 1620 with the publication of Novum Organum. This is kind of the response to the Copernican revolution. And to be clear, this moment owes its debt to many things, including the Muslim world for maintaining the works of Aristotle, including India for some of its work in mathematics. So it's not like there was no precursors, but I think this is really where you see the beginnings of what modern science is. This is even before the word science is invented. And this book, I think, is really critical to go back and read, especially if you're a science student. You'll find it's so remarkable about it is the way how modern science is defined in entirely theological language. In fact, if you've never been to church, you will not understand what he's talking about. And that's how science is defined. And the way I would put it, my translation to the words of today, is that science is a specific way of studying nature. To find provisional explanations of how the world works without invoking God. It's a specific way of studying nature. To be clear, when a person writes a poem about a sunset, that is a study of nature. It's an important study of nature. But it's also not science. Would you agree with me there? And there's something true about it. There's actually something true about that poem, even though it's not science. So when I say something is not science, I don't actually mean that in a derogatory way. This is something that I've noticed is a big gap. Sometimes I'll say, oh, that's not really science, and people will be deeply offended, which tells you something about our world, doesn't it? But I think some of the best things in this world are outside of science. Though, to be clear, I found myself in science, so this is not at all to be derogatory about science. I'm just trying to say that they're different things. And it's a way to find provisional explanations. A lot of times people treat science as if it is ultimate truth. That is not true. It's just a human effort to study nature, and all of its pronouncements have a certain degree of provisionality to them. This doesn't mean that all of a sudden one day 1 + 1 isn't going to equal 2, but there is a certain amount where we are understanding that there's a human fallibility embedded in this. And in fact, if you're a scientist, you're focused on the parts that you think are wrong that you're trying to change. That's what you spend all of your time on. is the part that's right at the edges where things are fraying, or maybe, if you're lucky, right at the center where things are wrong and we think we had it wrong, we thought had it right for a long time. It's a provisional explanation of how the world works. It doesn't tell us why, it doesn't tell us who, it doesn't give us meaning, it doesn't give us purpose. All it tells us is how things work. That's why it cares about words like mechanism. Like that's one of the great holy grails of science. I want to find the mechanism behind this thing. I want to find the underlying principle or law. But that's not everything about the world, is it not? And the last thing too is that, and this really goes back to deep theological reasons why, as this makes sense to me as a Christian. So as a Christian, I don't come to God by nature. I come to God another way. So this is how they were at that time too. And so when they started to do nature, they said, you know what, we want to study nature on its own terms. We already know about God. And we know that he does things that we don't understand. But we want to understand how what nature does on its own without God's influence. That's not to deny God, but we're not studying him. So one of the early rules they put in was that we're not going to invoke his action. Not because they didn't believe it was that way, but for that theological reason, they thought it shouldn't be done. And so that's what I believe science is. I think a really good example of kind of where the limits of science are and what it can tell you and what it can't is a project I've been working on for a little while. It's pretty exciting. It's been on my mind a lot. It's kind of a little bit orthogonal from normal research, but I'll show it to you here. Can't explain it in detail entirely, but so I was raised an earth creationist, and I now affirm evolution. I think that way how God made us all was through an evolutionary process. We share a common ancestry with the great apes, and our ancestors never dip in size to a single couple. There's an immense amount of evidence for this, and I've seen it firsthand, and I'm happy to explain it to you during the questions if you want to see. And because I was raised as a young earth creationist for a very long time, I felt very, very threatened by science and very threatened by this incredible amount of evidence for evolution, and especially because there's many people in this world that use it as a tool to beat down religious people. And so that was kind of my first introduction to evolution, is as a weapon. And when I became, really finding myself in science and really starting to look at it for myself, I graduated undergrad in 2000. That's the year that the human genome was sequenced. In 2005, that's my third year of my PhD, 5 years into my MD PhD program. That's when the chimpanzee genome was sequenced. I remember reading that paper, because I remember thinking to myself, if God wanted to make it clear that we didn't evolve, it's going to be obvious when we get the chimpanzee genome. We got the chimpanzee genome. It is not obvious that we did not evolve. In fact, it really looks like we evolved. It's the other way around. And I think that really spoke to me, because even if evolution wasn't true, what it did tell me is that God wasn't nearly as concerned about evolution as I was. Right? Amen? Still, all the same, there's this question that's been lurking in my mind for a long time, and many people in the church is, what about Adam and Eve, right? And this question in our heads, do we all descend from a single couple or not? And it seems like evolution says the answer is no. Well, there's this beautiful thing, and if you go to my blog, you'll see it. Where I actually found out, it turns out it's not nearly simple. We tend to think about genetic ancestry in science, but there's this other thing that we care about more in everyday life called genealogical ancestry. If you think about the world in terms of genealogical ancestry, what you find out really quickly is that not only is there a single couple that we all descend from, there's a large number of single couples from whom we all descend from. And could one of them have been up here like that, the two black people up there? Because Adam and Eve are black. Just kidding. And, in a divinely created garden, by the God of all creation to make himself known to all of us, it's entirely possible. There's nothing in science that says that it couldn't have happened. In fact, it could have been really recent. It could have been less than 10,000 years ago. This is like a very surprising finding. Now, I say that, so what does science tell us? It tells us a lot about this process. It tells us the way how genes work. We can study those things. It can tell us about genealogies. It can tell us about all this stuff. but it can't actually tell us if Adam and Eve actually existed. And if they had any theological significance and if we should care. The only way we could know that is if God somehow reached down and told us. That's just a foundational fact. And this is important because if God exists, that changes a lot of things if he actually wants to interact with us and be involved. Now, if he's a distant God, it doesn't really matter. But if he's a God who cares about you, if he's a God that cares about me, if he's a God who cares about the injustice in this world, this is something that really matters. And I can tell you for a fact, in the same way that science can't tell us if Adam and Eve existed, it cannot tell us if God exists. It cannot tell us about a lot of things that are really important. It can't tell us about morality and ethics. Science does not answer the question, is this the right thing to do? It makes it possible to do things. It makes it possible to build a nuclear bomb. It doesn't tell us when it's right to use a nuclear bomb. Do you see the problem? In fact, in this sense, science divorced from everything outside of science is a truly dangerous thing. It's not neutral at all. It can teach us about sterilization and eugenics and how all that stuff works. It can't tell us that that's wrong. It can give us even rationalizations to do truly evil things to one another. I don't know how they teach general ed right now, but this is another thing that just needs to be read. What happened during the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, where physicians lied to their patients in a way that caused little children to be born with birth defects on purpose for decades in the name of science in this country. Now, I'm not saying scientists are evil. I'm a scientist too, but we have to understand something, that science does not tell us that that's wrong. And if you are a person who believes that science can bring us to everything that's important in life, I just want to know, tell me what experiment tells me that this study was wrong. And if you can't, you're presenting a deeply dangerous picture of the world. So I'm from St. Louis. This is on Delmar Street, just walking distance from my home. I live in St. Louis, the shadow of Ferguson. You guys have heard of that place, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a crushingly sad thing to live in a segregated city. Mm. And to be in a place of such privilege of working in a university. And to see the crushing reality of segregation bring us to our world. Next year is the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. He walked in the streets. They faced the dogs, the police dogs and the fire hoses to end segregation, right? It's 50 years later. We are still segregated. What happened is we made it legal to integrate, but our hearts never desegregated. We never came to see people cross the line as a family. And at some point, we need to make a decision about what we're going to do about that other country, if we're okay with that. I'm not. And what's so crippling about this is that I'm just a scientist. There's nothing that science gives me to manage this. It is completely impoverished when I look at the segregated city of St. Louis. I think a great deal about Martin Luther King now. There's a group of us that are doing a reading group on him and his writings. He's a very thoughtful person. I actually would encourage you to join in that this next year. He did a lot of speeches and sermons. They're very easy to read. You can read one a week with a group of friends. He says in his letter to American Christians, he says, "But America, as I look at you from afar, I wonder whether your moral and spiritual progress has been commensurate with your scientific progress. It seems to me that your moral progress lags behind your scientific progress." Isn't that true? So I don't find hope honestly, in science for these things. I mean, I love science. I mean, this is where I am. I can't leave it, but that is not the answer to the problems of this world. I want to talk to you about something else that's beyond science that does actually give me some hope. Because it gives me a vision, a view of something that's very real in this world, outside the realm of science, but might give us access to something to kind of deal with this. It's this idea of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And this is really where I root my faith. It's not in any scientific evidence per se, it's really in this person. It's this idea that Jesus Christ was a historical person. It was this man Jesus, who's a real person that existed about 2,000 years ago, who was crucified, that means like executed. But then he physically rose from the dead. And there was a reason and a purpose for that, and I'll get to that in a moment. The key thing I want to point out is that this is not a scientific claim. What I will promise you is that no one will find a physical mechanism to explain the resurrection. Can you agree with me on that? Yeah. So this is not a scientific claim. So as much as you might, dislike or like him, I'm just trying to say is we need to look for something outside of science to make sense of this world, and this is one of these things outside of science that's starting to make sense of it to me. I'm going to quote some passages, and I think these are important because it'll help me understand what I think the core of my faith is. And because we see all these crazy types of Christianity out there, there are people even arguing for segregation on scriptural grounds. I don't know what type of Christian that is. That is not the type of Christian I endorse in any way. But what I can tell you is, I don't even care if you like the word Christian. If you want to be a Muslim and follow Jesus, I'm okay with that. If you don't like the word Christian, that is actually not the issue. But the issue for me is, who is this person Jesus that's worth giving everything up for? And it's written in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 7, one of the early creeds, and it's important because Paul's writing this, but it's thought to actually date to literally within the first year after Jesus died and rose again. Because it's a repetitious phrase. It's used in other places. You can almost think of it like a little creed, and it's often called the very first creed, and this is also how we define really what the gospel is. And the way I'm somewhat paraphrasing here, but this is very close to the actual text, is according to prophecy, Jesus died for us. He was buried, and then he rose again, and then he was seen by many. Now, what I would say is that this is the act of God in history to make himself known. This reveals that God exists, he is good, and wants to be known. This is how he makes himself known to us, because there's no other way we could know him on our own. Science cannot bring us to God. He had to bring himself to us. I want to talk a moment, because I'm a scientist, and for me, a fundamental question is this really true? And this is a great story, but is it true? And one of the things that helps make sense of this is some evidence from science and the fact that we're seeing a story being unfolded that takes several generations to unfold. We're talking over 1,000 years of people hearing these revelations from what appears to be an intelligence beyond our time, explaining what's going to be happening, and telling them about the covenant. So it's not just what Jesus did, it's about everything that led up to him. One of them is what the prophet Isaiah said. This is really important. He said that he grew up, and he's talking about what I believe is Jesus. Well, who is Jesus? He says he grew up before us like a tender shoot. He's talking about he was born here, like a root out of the dry ground. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. He was killed. And he was assigned a grave with the wicked, and to the rich with his death. If you know the story of Jesus, or you know exactly what I'm talking about, if you don't, talk to one of your friends, and they'll tell you exactly what this is referring to. That's going to be happening about 400 years later. And after he'd suffered, he would see the light of life and be satisfied. Now, this is a really interesting thing. This light of life was an issue of major contention for thousands of years. So Christians thought that these words were in the original manuscript of Isaiah. The Jewish Bible, those words weren't there. They said, oh, you Christians, you added that in later. Ha ha ha. And then something happened in my parents' generation that we discovered something truly profound. It was something called the Dead Sea Scrolls. You guys heard of those? And so this is a cache of scrolls from a long time ago. And this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. Isn't that beautiful? And science has something to say now, because we can ask, well, I mean, how old is this? And there is a really interesting and important paper, and this is the Great Isaiah Scroll right here, that shows that manuscript, so if you can see Jesus about here, this manuscript is right there. The gray box is where you get to from a textual dating. It's a little complex. If you talk to a textual critic, they'll tell you what that means. But then this is what you get to from the radiocarbon dating. Isn't that amazing? It makes you want to know now what was going on with that one verse, right? It says the light of life. What's going on, I believe, is that this is an intelligence we find from beyond our time, making itself known to us. He's going to send a son, and the way that's going to prove and authenticate that this is truly his messenger, not just a counterfeit, not just a pretender, not just a prophet, but it's really his son. It was by announcing it ahead of time 400 years ago, where there's no possibility of collaboration. And I think that's what happened. I mean, I'm crazy, I know, but this is more than just faith to me. I think this is something that is very real in this world, and that is what gives me some hope. I'm not the only one that believes this. You guys know who this is? Francis Collins. He's the head of NIH, one of the leading biologists in the world. Especially, as I mentioned the stuff about evolution, if you have curiosity about that, I really encourage you to read The Language of God. This is me with him in Houston a little bit earlier this year. He's, I think I'm a tall guy, but I'm hanging with guys like him, and I feel very short. This is how Francis Collins is. He's gigantic. He's like a behemoth. So I look very small there. It's like, oh, that's when you're high school or something? No, that was last year. Anyways, that's him. He's one of those people. But the other thing I wanted to point out too, so it's like, leading scientists would believe exactly what I just told you. But another thing I just really want to emphasize, is my friend Praveen Sethupathi, and you can see some videos of him online. He's a dear friend of mine, another biologist, but he was raised as a Hindu. There's something that is profound about this presence that we're encountering in the world that reaches across ethnicity, across language, across borders, across time, across personalities, and it seems to be calling to us. And he tells a story about how he found what he calls satya. Satya is the Indian word for truth. There are many Christianities out there that are very white, that are a product of America and that worship comfort and power. I just want to tell you, this is nothing like the Jesus I found. And there's something greater. There's something greater, and if you've gone to churches that in your life, I just think you need to give up on that and come to something greater. And if you've been turned off by churches like that, I completely endorse that. Come to those that really follow Jesus. I think you're going to find something that transcends, something that will reorder your entire world. So, the day after the Stockley trial, I went, this is just, I think it was about a month ago, against my wife's wishes. She was like, do not go out there. I walked out onto the road to see and to just put my eyes on what was happening there. And I met a group of 5 college students, just like you, walking out to protest, all right? We were walking out together, just down the road, and I'm telling you, just right outside my house. We were walking down the street to see them, and I just saw something that was so beautiful. There were these students that, 4 of them were white, 1 of them was black, and I asked them, especially, in St. Louis, the history is that African Americans really didn't protest in St. Louis, and they were proud of that. And so her parents and she's from St. Louis, her parents never protested, her parents' parents never protested. And I asked her, why are you protesting now? And she told me, it just seems like the responsible thing to do. And it was touching. And I walked with them, and I saw police officers lined up like the military. For no reason. And And it was just the saddest thing I can imagine. There's a moment where, things escalate and we're asked to disperse, so I did. And I wasn't even really protesting, I was just there to observe, right? And it was just remarkable to see this, because I saw these students afterwards, and they were just so angry and upset because they felt their voice was silenced. I mean, not just by the police, but even by these few people that did something violent too, or not even violent, it's destructive. And I'm just crushed by this, because what we really need is those 5 students to be 5,000. And so that nothing will drown out that voice, because, look, we're still a segregated world. And this is not the image of God. This is not the kingdom of heaven. I understand that this is a great country. I love it. I'm an immigrant here. I can wax poetic about this country too. This is not anti-American in any way. It's just not heaven yet. Is that okay to say? And I want God's kingdom to come here. And something that we've never seen before. There's no way to demonstrate it scientifically. And I would have no hope of a better world than what we've seen, unless I had known that there was something more than what I can observe. So with that, I'm kind of emotional right now, sorry. But we could just take 10 seconds of silence, and then I'll let you continue. Thanks.
Sometimes it seems like you speak so much more in silence than by saying words. This picture, I am from a different place. I'm also an immigrant. I'm not a Christian. I was born and raised as a Muslim. Why does this injustice move me as much to tears as it does to him or anybody in the audience? So there's something common in us, regardless of our color, or our religions, or our beliefs. That is there, no matter how you define it, no matter how you want to define it separate from others. But we share that feeling of suffering. We share that common feeling that no matter where you come from, it goes right to your heart. Right? So what does that mean? I didn't know about Jesus Christ. I have the same feeling. I don't know about Jesus Christ. I learned it when I came here. When I was a young man, 7 or 8 years old, you probably know about cricket, the game of cricket, right? We used to play cricket in our streets. And one day we were all playing there, and this guy, you probably are aware of the concept of a sadhu. Somebody who doesn't particularly follow any religion, but in our belief system, they have a direct contact with God. They don't pray 5 times, they don't go to church, but they have a certain way of connecting directly without any intermediaries. In Islam, there is also a concept of Sufism that has a little bit more formal way of the same thing that I described. Right? So he came when we were playing cricket. We were 7, 8 years old, not more than that. And he said, you guys spend so much time in doing things that are worldly. 7 or 8 years old, this guy perhaps 50, 60 years old. What will you do when it's your time to go meet your maker? And of course, we were kind of kidding around, fooling around. And one of my friends said, "We will go exactly the way you will." You know what he did? He had a piece of cloth on his shoulder. He pulled it out, laid it down, lied down on the piece of cloth, and he said, "I am going. Follow me if you can." He didn't know Jesus Christ, right? Neither did he know science. So my upbringing was a little bit more circumstantial. I wasn't born to be a scientist. At least I never had that feeling. Even to this day, I question that a little bit. That's why I'm the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy. So no, in that part of the world, you're either a doctor or an engineer or nothing. So what was my destiny that was set by my father and my mother and my family that I had to be an engineer? So I followed along. There was no other choice. What was more involved in my life at that time was that person who died on that piece of cloth. Right? Without knowing any religion that he belonged to, without having any belief system that he could follow to go where he went. And that was my exposure to belief system. And of course, I'm originally from Pakistan. I came here in 1980. I was grown up then, and all my growth was through the Islamic principles and Islamic belief systems. But for us, when we introduce ourselves, you know what we say? We say, we are 5,000-year-old Jew. That's who I am. We are 2,000-old Christian. That's who I am. And we are only 1,400-year-old Muslim. There is a lineage there. There is a connection there. With or without any intermediate, there is a connection. And you see that connection, you feel that connection in this picture that you see there. Right? So that was my growth. Science was not my growth. I did math, I knew calculus. I can solve differential equations. But I didn't see God in those equations. I didn't see God in Newton's principle. That came first before Newton or anything else was born in. Right? So science came later to couple with my religious beliefs. Okay? And that kind of defined many things. So what science did for me was broaden the way that I look at things. Right? This is what science is. You saw the slide, the first slide that Professor Swamidass showed. Right? It is understanding nature by observing and by doing experiments. I learned that technique after I learned to believe. First thing that we learned was say God is one and be solid on your belief. It's a monotheistic religion. That's what I first in Islamic tradition, when you're born, somebody comes, either father or mother or somebody comes and they pray in your ear as soon as you're born. And you know what is the second thing they do? They make them taste honey. That's something that is prohibited here. But we were born with a dip of honey, a dollop of honey. The first thing that I heard was in God's name. Okay, so the science came only as an awareness on top of my scientific beliefs, or on top of my religious beliefs. Okay, there was a sort of a geographical suffocation that I always had. And I always thought that it was like, if you are in a well, in a water well, a frog in a water well, you look up, you see that round thing, you say, that's the sky. And somehow, I don't know how that transpired into me, but I wanted to get out of that hole so I can see what else is around there. And there's a big, huge God's country out there as we go. So that's when I came here. This is where most of my scientific beliefs were established. I learned physics, I'm a physicist, and then I did engineering. On all of that then coupled together, then this question that constantly comes in, oh, how could you believe in these things if you believe in those? And we had this kind of discussion at the dinner time. And I think it's the most easy thing to answer. Science is about observation and experimentation, and on the base of that you can conclude. You can of course use a deductive method or inductive method. You can say you see 20 ducks and one of them was black. You say 5% of the ducks are black. That's an observation. Or you can find 2,000 ducks and you say, oh, there's nobody there who's black. So you say, ducks are never black. So all of these beliefs have a little limitation, but that's what the limitation that we have to constantly question and find what the answer is behind that. And that's exactly what my religious and science going together is all about. And I find it very easy, very comfortable, never a question. We were talking about how do you model this thing? Right? If I have two dimensions, there's the physicist in me. All right? So I have two different paths. If they are separated, no question. But I don't think any of us sitting here could believe that science and religion can be separated, regardless of what kind of belief system that you are in. Right? There is some common, that's why I had a little problem with the thing, life beyond science. What do you mean science stops and something else goes above that? How do we know that? We don't. In my belief system, they go together. In fact, almost religiously, that's what I've been taught. For a wrong reason, but that's what I've been taught. And so how do you then justify where do you exist on these two belief systems? You can be here or you can be here. If you are here, you go a little bit to the right, what happens? You fall in the abyss. But there's nothing beyond that. And you go to the extreme left, there's nothing. I did not intentionally share it, this thing. There's nothing below that either. So what is the best place to be? The best place to be is at this interface right here. I have an issue with science, I step back and I meditate and I pray. Somehow to get this understanding. Whenever I take my medicine, you know what I say? He's the giver. He's the healer. I'm taking an allopathic medicine. But my belief is in the Lord, in the God. Right? Or if you're on the other side, if it's a total religious belief that causes you to question something in your belief system, and it comes upon, I'm sure that you all have experienced that in one way, shape, or form, there's a pragmatic answer to that by just shifting yourself a little bit to the left. So if you are at this interface, life is easy. It might be a cop-out of a type, because you're not committing to one thing or the other. You can look at it that way, or look at it in more philosophical way, that these are simultaneously occurring things. They are integral part of one or the other. You cannot separate them. So when you go beyond this, they will still be together. We will still be observing. We'll still be doing experiments. We'll still be feeling. So for me, that division, that change never occurred. I was pseudo-religious before, I still am. I was pseudo-scientist before, I still am. But I learned a good, healthy combination of the two. I still cry when I see suffering, any kind of suffering. I still stay up nights upon nights when my experiment doesn't work. Right? And then I say, pray to God. There is a prayer in Islam which says, you are the entity which allows us to conquer some of this instrumentation. Before we try, we always pray that. So I use my prayer. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We came to the belief that all prayers are answered. Some now, some later. How later? We don't know that. I prayed for one thing today. I prayed that I will meet 4 or 5 beautiful people today. Smart people, passionate people, people that I can share this with. I went over all my talk. I did it. I'll quit here. I hope that we'll have a lot of time to answer questions. Thank you.
Let me hand out one of these to each of you. They told me beforehand that they would not let me sit between them. That they were going to gang up on me at one point.
Hey, before we get started, can I say something here?
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm only kidding.
Before you start, can I say something here?
I'm chiming you, though.
No, so we have this saying in our faith. I think you were just moved by the Spirit. Right?
Absolutely. The Spirit is all around us.
And I would say, I just wanted to say before we get
one Spirit, there are not 2 or 3 different spirits, only one.
I would agree. I would also say that I can see the image of God on you. It's beautiful.
Likewise. What I wanted to say was that I asked John if I can have coffee with him some other time. He said he doesn't drink coffee, it stunts his growth.
It's true. And just in case you're wondering, my last name is Growth. I pronounce it that way. I am 6'7". I wear a size 17 shoe. I have them put Lieutenant Colonel Growth because for a while in the Air Force I was a Major Growth. Hey, I was given, I am just amazed that Veritas invited me here. They have no idea what they're in for. And they gave me a list of questions to ask. You actually answered most of them.
So let's start with new questions.
So I've got some new questions for you. And here's where some of the questions. Give your own story. How has faith played a role in finding meaning in life and identifying how we should live?
You don't have to read them all. Pick the one that
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to give them an idea of what's out there. I heard and I used some words. First of all, and I want to keep this on science and religion. It is science that brought me to faith, not the other way around. I was an atheist, and it was the scientific method when I was challenged to use science to come to faith. Is that possible?
Not without actually breaking the rules of science. But I think what I would say, the best argument I've been given for this, so when I always say it's a particular way of doing things, we don't ever consider God's actions. So if you're going to act by the rules of science, I don't think you can actually really come to God because you would never even believe that He exists or even, honestly seek Him. But I think
I've been mistaken all these years.
No, but I would say that there is something about science that's a little more than just a method. It's more of this. It's something. So this isn't precisely science, but it's something that science teaches you, and it's maybe more of a nuanced sense. It's the sense of experiencing the world, realizing that we don't start with truth in the beginning, and we have to come to it, and being willing to just go ruthlessly follow it. And so one of my friends, Erica Carlson, too, who is a phenomenal female scientist. There's another one you can find online and listen to. she'll often tell people, and I think there's some, I complain to her all the time about her language. I don't think this is a precisely scientific experiment, but she'll call it one. She'll say that, just do an experiment. Just start reading through one of the Gospels that's like Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John about who Jesus is, and just pray that if God exists, if he'll reveal himself to you. And see if he does. Do that experiment and see what happens. Now, I'm not saying that that's like some sort of formula that, conjures God's existence that we control him, but I do think that it does speak to this idea that if he really made this world and he wants to be known, he's going to be reaching out to us. In fact, I think he reaches out to people who are not, who will never actually come to know him. And then there's this, some of the most important stories I've heard in the last years has been from people who are Muslim talking about dreams where God comes to them in a much more personal way than they ever expected. And I think that is a real presence.
Absolutely. So I go to a place, some of my students are here, we all went to a place in Switzerland/France called CERN. You probably know about that. This is where they smash particles and see what is the bottom of what is the smallest particle that could possibly be. I saw God there. It's in the form of a particle. It's called God's particle. It's called Higgs boson. That's what I think that is. So how do we define God? That's what something, there's no definition written anywhere. We can define it in a way we like. We can define it in any intelligent way that we like. To me, that's where it came from. To me, for me, that religion that I started with, so religion is any belief system. There are two ways to believe. One is that you practice and practice and practice so much, like you recite all those verses that Professor Swamidass mentioned, that eventually your heart will up and you start to believe. But you have to constantly practice. Or the other way is you don't practice unless you study enough and then you believe. Because that's when you understand what is the truth behind it. Both, there is nothing wrong with either of those principles. So for me, it came the other way. It came after I believed without actually the knowledge of it. I had experiences like a couple of things that I defined for you, but not the knowledge of it. It is when I learned science that I went back to look at the truth in the religion. And that's where this observation and analysis led me to where the truth is in religion. So a little bit different path.
A little bit different. Dr. Swamidass, you use a term, two words together, I really like here. And the question they were interested in is the historical relationship between science and religion. How do they complement or contradict each other? And the term you used was weaponized arguments. And I'm wondering about if you can both speak to the weaponized arguments that you have particularly had used against you when it comes to combining faith and science.
You should go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I don't want you to pattern talk first.
That's not right. So, I don't know if I would call my arguments weaponized, because that has a little negative connotation, but there are certainly weaponized arguments that were used against my belief.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah. What have you heard?
Asking. So, there are so many things. Of course, the whole creationism things come into mind, and if anybody has any question about creationism, go see his blog, and there is some beautiful way of, like Dr. Francis that he quoted on, and his work that he had done, and many other people, many other practitioners of the faith would define it in a totally different way. So that's sometimes is the only question that comes in as a weapon. If you believe in God, how could you believe in? How could you not believe in creationism? How would you believe in evolution and so on and so forth? But there are many ways to define all of that. That becomes a very nonsensical argument in my point of view. But those are the kind of weapons that I occasionally feel. But as I said, I am in the interface. It is very easy for me to go back and forth between these two without feeling any guilty conscience in my heart.
I just want to say one thing, because you talked about this model of like an interface between going back and forth, which I'm glad that's working for you. I just want to distinguish that from, I guess, how I see it. Just to kind of explain the difference.
Sure, absolutely.
But for me, I affirm mainstream science. Like I said, I find myself here. I'm a scientist. But I'm not caught between two equals. For me, I found something greater than science in Jesus. Like, if I had to choose between Jesus and science, I would take Jesus. And moreover, I would say, and honestly, it would be sad to leave science, but I know I would have chosen the greater thing. I just know that because it's not, for him, for me, he's not an abstract construct. It's like this real presence in this world in my life. And I know that science is going to pass away. There's not going to be science in heaven. We're going to know. And in that moment, though, we'll still be left with an eternity to understand who he is. So I found something greater than science. And the other thing, too, is in this whole model going back and forth, so I think there's a really core Christian doctrine in this for me, too. It's something called incarnation. So in Jesus, you see God coming down onto this earth to make himself known in a human form. It's kind of like if you wanted to communicate with your dog, what if you could actually turn into a dog instead of talking, right? But the key thing about this doctrine is that God didn't become half God and half human. He was fully God and fully human. And so what that means for me is that I'm not, as I've come to Jesus, I'm not any less Indian than I am when I started. I'm fully Indian. God made me this way. It's not that I'm any less of a scientist. I am a thorough scientist. There's nothing that I hold back from in my science. But I'm also fully a follower of Jesus. So that incarnate model is, I think, what makes sense of my world more. I know that this is a little bit sidetracked. I can answer the next, but that was actually just the first part. I'm probably talking too much, right?
That's all right.
And
I don't mind.
And then, so that's just how it's a little bit different for me. And then what was the question again exactly? Because I know you said something
I
else.
have no idea now.
Let me say something about this interface business. How do you get to that interface? How do you think you would get to that interface? Right? You're outside, you want to get to the interface. How do you get there? You went through the top to the center or bottom to the center. It has to be a journey that brings you at that interface. Without going through that, you can never get there. That means you got to have that knowledge, whether it is through religious practices or scientific beliefs, or both of them simultaneously. But you got to somehow indoctrinate yourself in that. I came a different way. I also came through the religious values, but my religious values were nowhere close to the kind of belief that Professor Swamidass has. I had a religion, I have a religion, but I was just born and raised in that, and that was the only reason that I did. I did not know the value of my religion till I knew the value of the science. So I put them all at the same level. And I think that's the difference that you're looking at right now.
And the original question had to do actually with that term.
The original question.
No, because I want to...
What's the original question?
It was about the weaponized argument.
Oh yeah, the weaponized. Can I talk about that?
Please do.
So this is actually, so when I said that I see the image of God in you, then you just kind of like,
I got a little glimpse of it.
no, I think that God has made us all of us, from all cultures, from all backgrounds, Christian, non-Christian, with the image of God. The image of God is in you, and I think that the best way to be human is to reflect that image. And I just see that in you, and it's beautiful. And so that was a very profound truth statement. It's beautiful. Don't you guys see it too?
I feel it.
I feel it. And I think that, I think we can do that without even knowing the source of what we're reflecting. And I think that you reflect the same source that I'm talking about. Now, I want to say that there's also something about getting this weaponized thing that's true about human nature too. Everyone has the image of God in them. You have the image of God in you too. It's not that he's so special and unique that he can pull this off. In fact, I think that God has made you to do beautiful things in this world. It's really important to think about as you think about the injuries that have been inflicted on you, when you think about what you want to do for your career, when you think about how you form your family. God has made you in His image to reflect Him, and it is a beautiful thing when it happens. At the same time, deep in all of our hearts, we are profoundly sinful people. We take beautiful things that are meant to be works of art, and we use them as weapons. I've just seen this so much. I mean, and so science is one of these weapons. It's become a standard of truth that you can use and wield against other people. For me, it was a place of recovering from injury in many ways to get to the place I am now in science because of the ways that it had been used. But I gotta tell you, it's not just science that's used that way. What's so dark about St. Louis, and you guys should come meet me in St. Louis sometime and see. It's important to go see. Just simple things about where people choose to live is weaponized right now. Like, we live in a segregated country. Simple things about like how to just run a government. It should not be like it is now. I'm telling you, I'm almost in your parents' generation, but I'm kind of halfway in between them. I don't know who I should be identifying right now, but whoever your parents are, they did not leave us a good country. They did not leave us a good world. If you look at how they live their lives, we need to do something better right now. Because everything has become weaponized. Everything has become weaponized. Simply things about just where we choose to live, the schools we send our kids to. These things are weaponized and they divide us, and we're in a broken, segregated world.
Just one little thing that I would add here. Flip this whole argument. Right? Completely flip that argument. We have a religion that is being weaponized more than anything else. Is that an issue with the religion? Or is that an issue with the believers? Or quote-unquote believers? Answer that and you'll find a lot of satisfaction from that answer.
Thank you. I just wonder if you could speak for a moment, and then I think we should open it up. If you could speak to this idea of hope within science. Does science provide us with hope? You spoke about science just tells us kind of a mechanism. So a little bit about, because I think we're looking for hope. I'm a preacher at heart, not a scientist. I think we're looking for hope.
So I've been reading a lot of Martin Luther King, and he's considered like a prophet of hope. It's important to understand that if he was alive today, he would be, I think, about 81. I mean, he still could have been here today. We murdered him. But if he was still here today, or if his spirit was with us today, we wouldn't recognize him. We'd call him a violent protester. But he's called the prophet of hope. He faced down. We deal with a very pernicious type of racism in the school. It's a very pernicious one. It's one that seduces us all to believe that we're not racist. And to live in a way that just treats people in another neighborhood as if they're not our family. It just teaches us to be comfortable with segregating our hearts. It's a deeply pernicious thing. But he dealt with something different. It was much more overt, it was much more direct. It was people having no fear to use violence against it. And he had hope. And I think about that a lot in this moment. And I've been reading a lot of his work, I have to say. It's been deeply influencing me. If you have a chance to, I really encourage you to start reading him this next year, just as the act of deference to the fact of what's gone on before. And, if you were to approach the problem of civil rights in the 60s with a scientific mind, you would look at where things are now, where things have been in the past. You would kind of see where averages are and standard deviations and just try and measure where we are relative to where things have been. And you would probably come away thinking, this is a lot better than it's been in the past. That's a very scientific view of this moment, of that moment. The reason why I think we call Martin Luther King a prophet of hope is that is the scientific way of seeing it. But he saw something that was not seen. He saw a distinct possibility of an integrated society not just with a few token people here and there, not just where we can just have enough people that look different that we can feel like we're not racist, but truly an integrated society, a beloved community. And it's never existed on earth. He's describing the kingdom of God. There's no way to have hope for this world without having the kingdom of God in view. Because I believe that that is what God is doing right now in our world. He's trying to work that out. And we are resisting with everything in us. The question for you, the question for your generation is, are you going to pursue the kingdom of God or the kingdom of men?
All right, so in my belief, hopelessness is sin.
Hopelessness is sin.
Yes. So therefore, by definition, I have to be hopeful. I didn't sin. He was pushing me to eat bacon tonight.
You put bacon on my donut.
Duck donut. I did not eat it.
We blessed it and called it broccoli. And then
He did, and I still did not believe it. Two Christians trying to corrupt a Muslim. So,
when you get corrupted one day and try some bacon, you'll understand.
now alcohol is a different.
Moving on to the next question.
Let me say something about this. I read a lot of Lynn White. He's a philosopher. He wrote the essay on historical roots of our ecological crisis. I read a lot of Fritz Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, and so on and so forth. The problem that Lynn White describes, and he's a Christian theologist. Some people don't call him Christian theologist, but he's
Theologian?
theologian. Theologist is different than theologian.
I don't know what a theologist is. Is it a thing?
It's the thing. So, theologist / theologian.
We'll work with you either way.
So he says that the issue of the modern crisis, and he is talking more about environmental issues, but you can reflect on anything that you like in that essay, is the separation in the form of nature from human being from human being, plants, for example, don't seem to have a spirit, right? So therefore, you cut them down, conquer the earth, right? So what does that mean? A rock is a rock, doesn't have a spirit. So we can blow up the mines and draw as much coal as we like. It's a rock. This is where Saint Francis comes in. Saint Francis of Assisi. And he talks to the dog. He talks to the wolves. He talks to the birds. Because the idea that he's shaming people. He's not interested, I shouldn't say interested. It's not the focus of his work, the bird and the wolf and the dog. It's the human being, right? But he wants to show the association and the spirit in everything that is around here. This table has a spirit.
I'm not going to lean on it if it's got a spirit. It just came off of it there. Hey, I'm going to ask if you have any questions. There's a microphone up here. I'd like you to come up in order of IQ. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
Lowest or highest first?
I'm not smart enough to answer that. We could do it by height, but if you actually have a question, we're going to come up to this microphone. Please speak into it so we all hear it. Does anyone have a question? I see you moving. Come on. Oh, by the way, please try to keep the questions brief so we can have longer answers.
Are you looking at it?
So for me, doubt plays an important part in my religious faith. I find that doubt and skepticism actually strengthens my faith, and I was wondering if you have had experiences along those lines.
Yeah, I think that when you hear about God, you never experience Him, It sounds either too good to be true, too terrifying to be true, or there's something in between. I mean, it doesn't actually seem real. And so it's very natural to doubt. And when I first started being open about my faith in public places like this, what I would talk about a lot is about the evidence that's out there, and there's quite a bit of evidence. I talked a little bit today about that. If you look at my, if you Google my name and the resurrection on Veritas, you'll kind of see a lot of stuff there. For me, I think that real key sign is the resurrection. That's how we know that, because I mean, I agree, like, if we didn't have, if God didn't actually make it clear, yeah, maybe we were supposed to worship the table, because that is a very divine spirit. I mean, who knows, right? It could be anything, but I think the only way we could know is if God made himself clear. This is the most legitimate thing I can see in this world that actually shows he's real, is the resurrection. So I would talk about the evidence for that, and there is quite a bit of evidence. But there's a moment when I was giving, it was actually while I was giving a Veritas forum, and I was just explaining about this, where I just realized I'm giving this answer and it's not even really true anymore. This isn't to deny the evidence, but I just realized that, you know what, I've actually come to a point where I've had an experience that's real. It's like I've seen something. And when you see something, well, at least when I've seen Jesus, it's really silenced by God in a way that it's very hard to explain. I'm not saying that there isn't difficult times, but I met Jesus and was silenced by God.
All right, so so doubt has a little bit of a negative connotation with it. I would say inquiry. And that then brings to everything that I put together. I inquire about God, whether God exists and in what shape or form, whether it is the table. There are many religions that pray in front of a statue, right? Are they less human beings because they pray in front of a statue?
No, they're not less human beings.
They're not less human beings, right? So therefore, it is what you seek that is the most important thing. The religious journey or scientific journey, it is the seek, it is the desire, it is the inquiry, right? One find different paths towards that inquiry. Maybe at the end of the day, we will all find Jesus Christ, right? It's a possible. We don't know that. Maybe at the end of the day, we won't find Jesus Christ. That's also a possibility. If it's a 50-50 chance, I'm ready to take that. If I meet Jesus Christ on the other end, I'll give him a hug.
Does anybody else have to give you a hug too? And then we'll follow with you, okay?
So you shared Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote about moral progression and scientific progression. My question more is towards the country as a whole, not just people, not just like groups of people, not just a campus. How do you begin to move a country towards greater moral progression over scientific progression?
Again, I think like the old saying, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. I think it is a reflection on yourself, on ourselves. That it's something which is a lot of people have argued about. I won't go into the philosophical argument about the truth, number one, and the differentiation between evil and good. That's a whole another Veritas talk that you will sometime do. But there is something that you feel, right? Scientifically feel that. Not that something that comes into your dream, that there is this thing that has to be done and that is the right thing. So that happens. And there is a heart, there is a brain. They have the function. They have this electromagnetic wave that guides you in a certain way. Right? So you have to ask that question to yourself. What do I need to do? Right? If once you answer that question and do what the answer comes, right, then maybe one by one, we can get there.
So I maybe have a little more specific suggestions here. Now, I'm speaking most strongly to those of you who are in the church. Though this applies, I think, to everyone, but especially if you call yourself a Christian and you're in the church. I'm talking to you right now. And you can listen in too, and if you want to be part of this too, by all means, because I'm going to talk about what it means to follow Jesus. What I want to tell you is that I grew up in this church too. I'm an American. I drink from this stream, but I also drink from another stream. It's the stream of the Indian church. These are about as opposite as two churches can be. The American church, and I'm speaking very broadly, maybe you have to go to a specific one that's very strong, so just go with me for a moment. I'm talking about an archetype, all right? And I love the American church too, so this is not an attack, but it is a forceful correction. The American church is devoted to comfort and to power. The American church, and I'm not talking just about the white church, I'm talking about the American church is devoted to comfort and to power. That is the idols that it worships. I wish they worshipped at a stone idol. It would be easier to deal with, but we worship something much, much more insidious. Now, the Indian church has many problems, but one thing that's defined by is, first of all, they're a profound minority. They have no hope of power. They've never had hope of power for thousands of years. They also have been obedient to suffering. They've been willing to follow Jesus in a way that caused suffering in their lives. A long time ago, Western countries stopped sending missionaries to Indians because Indians said, you know what, don't worry about it. We will send missionaries to India. And if you go visit them, you'll find out that this has not been an easy path. There's persecution there. There's extreme. And so, when the American church talks about persecution, it is very hard for me to get my head around. I'm not saying that people like Christians all the time, but who would like people devoted to comfort and power? What I think that needs to happen is that when you think about your life, and on the most personal decisions about what careers you go into, where you spend your money, where you spend your time, where you do your career, when you think about your resources, and I'm not saying don't go to graduate school, like if you're made to go to graduate school, go get the skills and the training to do that. It's still an incarnate message, but when you think about all these most personal of all decisions, who is your master? Who are you going to serve? Who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow comfort and power, or are you going to choose powerlessness and the obedience of suffering?
Just a little bit of, just a small thing, with all due respect. I think it's a pretty large generalization to call American church comfort and power. I have seen a person, so obviously it's not all American. I have seen one person who was dedicated in her religion, in her wealth that she gave to the church, and I loved her so much, Christian, that I married her.
I do want to agree with it's great when the Muslim tells me you're being a little bit too hard on the church. To be clear, and I want to affirm this. I'm not trying to say that this is an all. I kind of preface that by saying that there is good churches, that there are people doing the right thing. You heard that, right?
Yeah.
There's an archetype I'm talking about. And I'm just saying that rather than being the exception to the rule, I'm just saying your generation needs to be so much better. It needs to be. We need a new way forward.
You started this whole question from Martin Luther King's writings, and King said that the church needs to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. It needs to establish and set the direction that a country goes in, and not just reflect. There was another question.
Hello. During, I think your discussion, you were talking about how when you viewed the mathematical equations, you didn't really see God in those equations. When I look at those equations, I see such order and beauty and is there any way that?
Did I say that? I didn't see that in that.
Oh, did you say that?
But I said it the other way though.
Oh, what was it? What was it when you said it?
What you just said.
Oh, that you did
Math
see.
and differential equation.
And you didn't.
Speaks God to me.
Oh, it does. Oh, okay. That was more of my question. Would you see would math and its beauty order strengthen your connection with God? So, yeah.
I'm sure both of us. I don't want
I
to.
think we agree. I talk a lot. You should go ahead and do it.
Math class always caused me to pray.
You see, now, as I said, all prayers are answered. Some now, some later.
Is there another question? I refuse to interrupt.
Just briefly answer that question. Yeah, of course, I see beauty in this world, and like I think all of us, everyone, even my atheist colleagues, see the beauty of this world and they want to worship.
Yeah.
I think I just found out in the resurrection that instinct actually is correct. So this is not at all saying that I'm the only one that worships as a Christian. It's just that I found out that there's actually a substance to that instinct that we all have.
I want to add one more. Speaking of good Christians coming from a Muslim.
Am I one of your good Christians? Or?
You're the best. That's why I got so closer to him. I really feel a brotherhood or whatever with this person. I am that person. But you know, when 9/11 happened, there was a lot of tension. My wife, a white American Christian, Catholic, and she told me that was Friday after 9/11 not to go to the mosque. I did. You know who was outside? There were about 100 Christians who went around the mosque. They held hands together and protected the people who were going to pray.
Any last questions? I think we actually came in on our timing, what we
Can I
wanted.
just say one last thing?
Absolutely.
I want to say one last thing.
All right, you go ahead.
I was going to turn it back to you guys.
Look, I just want to say you are in a beautiful place right now in the university. I hope you really press in hard to things that were said here by both of us. The university is a beautiful place. It's a moment to deal with people who are different, to see what's outside your realm. During this time, I really hope you ask and really try and find out what type of person you want to be. Like, are you going to pursue the kingdom of man, or are you going to pursue the kingdom of God? And if there's any way, if there's any sense that maybe you had curiosity or wondering, you know, when this guy, this scientist, this crazy Indian came from outside, he was crying in front of me, that happens, you get a typo, a bad typo, you know, I just want you to I'm not lying to you about this real presence of Jesus. He wants to know you. Draw close to him and he'll draw close to you. Just pursue him. That's the most real thing I've found on this earth.
Hallelujah. What I would say is that two people reading the scripture come out with a totally different meaning of the scripture. So obviously the reading alone doesn't do anything. What is that you need to read the scripture in a way that it is meant for? Whether it is Quran or Torah or Mishnah Torah or any or Bible. What is that? It is not the scripture that needs to be taught or learned. It is that feeling, that understanding, that translator in you, it has to be trained. How do you train them? Right? I have a theory which is through classes like this, through the education that you get in the university. It is the awareness, and not just awareness. People get aware for different reasons and different methods. Awareness for critical consciousness. Remember those words. Critical consciousness. If Jesus Christ If somebody wants you to believe in Jesus Christ just because, I'm going to use a word nonsensical, but I didn't mean to criticize anybody here. What he's saying is absolutely right. You got to get that feeling, that translator in you. And that translator doesn't come automatically. It has to be trained. And education is what trains that person. Thank you.
I like that.
Missed again.
Wow, what a great conversation.
He starts and never ends.
He's very calm. Can we just give these guys another round of applause? So at this time, I would ask all of you to fill out those Veritas survey cards if you haven't done that already. It'll probably take half a minute to a minute. It's so important for us to make these events relevant and engaging and thoughtful. So that would be really helpful for us. When you walk out the door, we are going to have ushers collecting those survey cards, so if you could just hand that to them, it would be great. Otherwise, this officially concludes our Fall 2017 Veritas Forum. Thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.